In this screencast, we're going to continue on with Chapter 4 notes about or dealing with cell transport and the cell membrane. So in speaking of types of cell transport, and remember that cell transport, what we're talking about is moving substances, essentially molecules, different types of molecules, either into the cell from their environment or out of the cell into their environment. So either, for instance, taking in nutrients or getting rid of waste products. But that's cell transport, getting things across the cell membrane. Well, there's two types. And the first type, which we're going to focus on in this screencast, is called passive transport. And from the name, that simply implies that it just happens without the use of any energy. So in living cells, they don't need to use any of the energy for substances to move passively. They simply remove, and in this picture, from where they are highly concentrated to where they are less concentrated. And it doesn't take any energy to do that. It's kind of like being able to roll downhill on skates, like this awesome animation is showing. That it doesn't take any energy to roll down a hill. Okay? But active transport, on the other hand, which we aren't going to say much about during this screencast, active transport is essentially the opposite of passive transport. The cell or the organism has to use energy. So think about this for humans. Of all that food and nutrients that you take in to get energy for your body to do things, a lot of that, over half of the energy or the food that you take in is actually done or used for the 80 to 100 trillion cells you have for active transport. And that's simply moving things from where they are less concentrated to where they are more concentrated. So it's actually like moving things uphill. And that takes energy. So again, passive transport is where the cell uses no energy. And this is able to happen because of this fact, that molecules in any substance, they are in constant motion, and they move randomly. And actually, molecules, even though you can't see them, when they're moving, they're actually running into each other. They're bouncing into each other, kind of like pool balls or billiard balls bounce into each other on a pool table. And so when they do that, they start knocking each other around and they start spreading out. And for that instance, without the use of energy, molecules are going to spread from where they are highly concentrated to where they are less concentrated. So that's kind of like having, this is my pile of leaves in the fall. This is my pile of leaves that I just raked and used all my energy to rake them up and concentrate them in one spot. And if I just let them be, what's going to happen is they're all going to spread out, which is really a pain. And yes, the wind is moving them around, but just as an analogy, they're going to spread out. Or if I drop water on the floor, it spreads out. It doesn't concentrate into one particular spot. Instead, the molecules move and spread out randomly. So the first type of passive transport is a specific type called diffusion. And diffusion essentially is the specific type of passive transport, but it says the same thing, that molecules are going to randomly move and move from where they are highly concentrated to where they are low in concentration. All right? And so, now this animation doesn't move, but if we let in this beaker, where you can see the water level, and this represents a cell, you can see that it's that there's little spaces. What's going to happen over time is that these molecules, without any energy, are going to spread out. Now, diffusion is the same reason that you can walk into your house and you can smell cookies that are baking in the oven in the kitchen, or it's why you're driving along the highway and you can see a dead snake or a dead skunk and you can smell it. I mean, it's because molecules, they spread out. And they actually do this. They always keep moving. They always keep moving. But they move until what we call equilibrium is achieved. In other words, that the same concentration is throughout the container. In other words, there's just as many of these red molecules inside the cell as there are outside. Now, molecules, again, are going to keep on moving, but they spread out so that they're randomly dispersed throughout the entire container. Now, with the second type of passive transport, we're still talking about diffusion, which means we're still talking about passive transport. Remember, no energy. No energy. All right? The thing about facilitated diffusion is that if you remember the structure of a cell membrane, is that in a cell membrane, there's these specific types of proteins. They're called membrane proteins. But what they actually do is they form specific channels through which molecules can fit through. These particular molecules, sometimes certain molecules, they have to go through the channels because they can't fit directly through those little lipid molecules. So a lot of times they're specific and they have to fit through those channels. But if they're specific channels that they have to go through, it's called facilitated diffusion. And oftentimes that's used for larger molecules or things that have a specific charge, and that's the only way that they can slip from one side of the membrane to the other. That's facilitated diffusion. So a thing to remind you with facilitated diffusion to not lose sight of is it seems like it's a little bit more complex, but it really isn't. The only thing is that you specifically have to have membrane proteins that the molecules have to go through, but it's still a net movement without energy from where there's a high concentration of molecules to where there's a low concentration of molecules. And we need to know that that could mean into a cell or out of a cell. It really doesn't matter. Just that the rule remains that it's from high to low concentration. It's always high to low concentration with passive transport. And the third type of passive transport involves one that is specific for water molecules. Now remember, passive transport means no energy is used by the cell. It just happens without the input of any energy. But osmosis is specific for the movement of water. Now remember, water molecules are matter also. They're made out of molecules. They're made out of H2O molecules. So they're also going to behave like any other type of molecule when it comes to their passive movement. And water molecules will move from an area of great concentration or more concentration to an area of lesser concentration. So again, we're talking about molecules moving from high to low concentrations. Molecules are spreading out. So these little molecules, what we're showing in this picture, they would move from left to your right. Why? Because there's more of them on the left-hand side than there are on the right. And remember, they would move from left to right until equilibrium. Now, it doesn't mean they'd stop moving. It just means that they would move until they're equidistant apart, until they're all spread out. And so later on, we're going to talk a little bit more about osmosis. As you'd probably guessed, and probably know this, I guess, is that water is very important to all living things. It's so important that it's important to really take note of exactly how it behaves with cells, in which direction it's going. Osmosis is really just the diffusion of water, the movement from high to low concentration of water molecules. They'll move from where there's more of them to where there's less of them without the input of energy.